The woke collectivist ideology leads to perpetual cultural warfare and perhaps in the end actual warfare. It can only culminate in the collapse of society into darkness and barbarism.
Good evening, members. Tonight we are joined by a very special guest, Leonard Leo, who's an American lawyer, businessman, and a conservative legal activist. He's the co-chairman of the board of directors of the Federalist Society. He has been widely credited as the person responsible for directly advising the first Trump administration on the appointment of justices to the United States Supreme Court. Please join me in welcoming Leonard Leo to the Oxford Union.
Thank you very much. Good evening. It's a privilege to address the Oxford Union Society. I'm not aware of a student organization anywhere in the world with such a long-standing and impactful commitment to a serious exchange of ideas about all aspects of human affairs. Your dedication to intellectual freedom, spirited and witty debate, thoughtful inquiry, and civil discourse is a model that other institutions would do well to follow. You are a true testament to what Oxford's own John Henry Newman described in The Idea of a University, which is that truth is wrought out of by many minds working together freely. The purpose of my remarks tonight is to critique the deliberate and widespread rejection of that pursuit of truth. If I may borrow again from Newman, no one should be forced to believe, but neither should the truth be silenced under the pretense of liberality. Newman was making a very important observation here, and while his point was long viewed as obvious, it is shocking how often it has been honored in the breach. Newman's insight demands remembering. Real tolerance requires us to engage with opposing views, not silence them in order to appear broad-minded. The opposite happens today because we live in a time of cancel culture that claims to promote inclusivity and the pursuit of truth while suppressing ideas that challenge whatever political or cultural trends might be au courant. These intolerant new censors threaten individual freedom and human dignity in an unprecedented extent. And to understand why, we must briefly examine the history of such intolerance in Western society. Going back centuries, the defenders of freedom spent most of their time worrying about state-sponsored intolerance. Here in England, for example, this concern manifested itself with the adoption of the Bill of Rights of 1689 and the Toleration Act of that same year, along with the Catholic Relief Acts of the 18th and 19th centuries. In my own country, as James Madison explained in Federalist 10, the structural features of the national government contained in the U.S. Constitution were intended, at least in part, to prevent a majority of citizens from wielding power in a way that trampled the rights of other citizens. And internationally, instruments such as the European Convention on Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights address time-old problems such as the suppression of free speech and religious liberty and other state actions that impinge on freedom. To be clear, our forebears had good reason to fear that state power would lead to state-sponsored intolerance. The history of human civilization consistently shows that the greatest threat to the dignity and worth of the human person is state power, wielded to elevate favored people or ideas at the expense of the disfavored. The state has always been able to impose its will through brute force. And when former President Ronald Reagan addressed this distinguished union on December 4th, 1992, he had this age-old problem in mind. But in reading his remarks, which he titled Democracy's Next Battle, I was especially struck by one of his admonitions. Reagan said that wherever there are forces that would destroy the human spirit and diminish human potential, They must be recognized, and they must be countered. This is what we must do today: recognize and counter the new forces that threaten individual liberty and human dignity. The intolerant elites of today control not only government, but also leading private institutions. They have overrun areas such as business, finance, tech, media, medicine, and higher education. Put simply, these private actors are industrializing intolerance on a society-wide scale. Who are the captains of this industry of intolerance? Well, I hesitate to call them liberals because they reject freedom of speech, religious freedom, and other liberalizing principles at the core of the Western tradition. They censor ideas they don't like and cancel or ostracize people they don't favor, and none of that is liberal. I also hesitate to call them progressives because at the heart of their project is a regressive vision that harkens back to the days of tribal parochialism and distrust, the scars of which you can still see in parts of Europe and Asia. The adherents of this worldview minimize human dignity and worth with its focus on the individual in favor of a more dehumanizing group identity. So, for simplicity, I will call them woke collectivists. They are adherents of identity politics, and they are driving intolerance at every level of society. The woke collectivists have long targeted higher education. Not in this room. They began with leading institutions before infiltrating smaller and more average colleges and universities. Their strategy was intentional and, yes, intelligent. Universities train the future leaders of most great industries, so this was a natural first home for sowing the seeds of intolerance. Sure enough, modern campuses have become a breeding ground for generations of woke collectivists who have learned to punish dissent rather than foster open debate, to erase ideas rather than thoughtfully refute them, and to feign liberality by pretending to be open-minded while actually suppressing thought and opinion. When someone is taught to think and behave in a hateful way, it becomes the stock and trade of professional life. And that's precisely why the woke collectivists came here first. And from here, they have spread to private industries far and wide. Perhaps the biggest woke collective campaign has been in business, finance, and banking. Activists have infiltrated the most important firms in the world, from the S&P 500 in the United States to the FTSE 100 in the United Kingdom. They have set about forcing their views on society and censoring opponents in three main ways. The first goes by the acronym DEI, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Under the aegis of DEI, companies routinely divide employees into sexual and racial affinity groups. They hire, promote, and fire people based on their skin color or sexual identity. DEI has been weaponized by human resources departments to censor people and to label reasonable and widely held values as hate speech in need of punishment. DEI has also infected marketing, making it a tool for virtue signaling and indoctrination on hotly controversial issues such as gender identity, turning normal commercial transactions into political or ideological theater. There are real-world adverse consequences to this corporate intolerance. Many employees are made to feel as though they are outcasts or bigots, which in turn breeds anger, envy, and hostility. In some cases, people lose their jobs or are denied promotions in spite of their performance and merit, weakening the incentive to pursue excellence. And on the consumer side, people have to worry about whether advertising and in-store displays run counter to how they wish to introduce their young and impressionable children to such difficult subjects as gender identity. To put a finer point on it, why shop somewhere that makes it harder for you to parent your kids. The second woke inflection point in the marketplace is ESG. The environmental, social, and governance agenda has a clear objective of censoring and deplatforming what the woke collectivists deem to be intolerable features of commerce. Pension funds, hedge funds, and asset managers have refused to invest in various companies that don't toe a collectivist party line. Investment advisory firms stack the deck by reinforcing woke ideology through their proxy work. And all of this creates a climate for divestment campaigns against disfavored industries. Some might ask why this matters. After all, doesn't voluntary and free exchange sort all of this out? That's only true if certain essential understandings and relationships are enforced and respected in the marketplace, which isn't the case when woke collectivists are in charge. Markets work when corporate managers respect their fiduciary duty to shareholders and when investors trust that their money is being invested to maximize their returns. ESG undermines both these relationships, and that's why we're now seeing litigation that challenges some of these practices. The third woke capital flashpoint is the financial services industry, where customers are debanked for political or ideological reasons. One of the most high-profile instances took place here in England involving former Brexit leader, I guess he's still a leader, Nigel Farage. Internal bank documents about the cancellation of his account revealed concerns that his political views, including on gender identity, COVID-19 policy, and illegal immigration, were not consistent with the bank's position as an inclusive organization. Also, many conservative and Christian organizations in the United States have reported similar account closings, with banks citing them as high risk because of their political or religious views. Accounts get closed with no warning, and funds often are not returned to customers for weeks. This creates an enormous chilling effect on free speech and religious practice. Do you take a stand on a high-profile issue, support various causes, or unabashedly embrace your faith if you worry your financial stability will suffer? Either banks are intolerantly suppressing freedom of expression and religious conscience because they dislike certain views, or, as heavily regulated entities beholden to the state, they fear that doing business with certain people who hold certain ideas might create regulatory and oversight risk. Neither option is a satisfactory state of affairs for a free society. Now, unfortunately, the woke collectivists extend far beyond the financial industry. Healthcare has been similarly affected. Several major medical centers in the United States, for example, have used racial discrimination to prioritize and provide medical assistance and care. In their effort to boost minority hires in the medical field, medical institutions now adhere to something called racial concordance, which holds that patient health improves when they're treated by a physician of the same racial group. The science says otherwise, and more to the point, that discriminatory view leads to the resegregation of healthcare. But no matter, the activists peddling this fiction try to censor those who speak the truth. Their efforts will inevitably adversely affect the availability and quality of care. And they'll dissuade the best and the brightest from pursuing a vocation in medicine, which stifles innovation. The woke collectivist capture of medicine is quite literally a threat to your health. Industrializing intolerance, though, doesn't end there. Censorship by social media platforms and search engines are probably the most commonly recognized examples of the woke collectivist campaign. Conservatives have long complained about this, with good reason. And most recently, artificial intelligence has exhibited some woke biases by producing responses that disfavor conservative perspectives. That includes generating content that overrepresents diversity in historically inaccurate ways and relying on development environments that skew the models that produce text, images, or video. The skewing is the point. The woke collectivists want their perspective to dominate and indeed to be the only one. I'm reminded once again of John Henry Newman's admonitions in The Idea of a University. By a false liberality, men may make themselves enemies of inquiry, and by a bigotry of their own, they may keep others in ignorance. Without the free flow of information, you cannot maintain a free society. That's true whether the stifling comes from a tyrannical government, as it does in failed communist states, or from misguided coders in Silicon Valley. Either way, people are deprived of the information they need to make the most of their lives and move society forward. And as a result, society begins to move backward. This is the real danger of woke collectivism across every industry and institution. It leads to a future that looks like the worst of our past, a future of no progress because there are no rights and no protections for human dignity. The question now is whether we will let this happen, if we'll rush headlong into a new and dark age. And I use the term dark age for a reason. If the many private sector influencers who simply acquiesce in or just go along with the woke collectivists, if they really thought hard about the ideology here, and I don't think they do, they would have to admit that it rejects the rational thought, critical thinking, and reasoned dialogue that built the West. They hold that the prevailing systems for acquiring knowledge or understanding are rigged to perpetuate social injustice and inequality, which means that soundness of argument, conceptual clarity, and appeal to evidence and examination are out the window. If that's how you think, then you have to conclude that those who disagree with you are morally reprehensible creatures who deserve to be controlled, punished, and even oppressed. The woke collectivist ideology leads to perpetual cultural warfare and perhaps in the end actual warfare. It can only culminate in the collapse of society into darkness and barbarism. Hopefully you're asking, how can we avert this crisis and end this era of industrializing intolerance? There are no easy answers for a conservative like me. After all, I embrace the free market and believe that the primary purpose of law and government is to basically facilitate the ability of businesses and individuals to govern their own affairs as they wish. I am presumptively hesitant to call for government intervention to micromanage or control private ordering. And so the first line of offense probably needs to be private action. Influencers and citizens who still prize freedom must band together to call out woke practices with the goal of affecting stock price and consumer behavior. We also need to build pipelines of talent and networks with the goal of placing C-suite executives and board members who will displace woke collectivism from their current positions of power. Private parties can also institute litigation against institutions for the harm they do, such as breach of fiduciary duty, unlawful discrimination, and breach of contract. In the United States, some of these tactics are now being deployed with an impressive degree of success over a short period of time. For instance, leading asset managers such as BlackRock and JP Morgan and Fortune 50 companies such as Walmart and Target have changed their DEI and ESG practices. Universities, regrettably, have been more impervious to change. It will take more time and innovation to dislodge the woke collectivists on campuses. But private action isn't the only solution. There will be times when state intervention is warranted to address industrialized intolerance. For example, government investigations and enforcement actions are warranted when companies engage in various kinds of commercial collusion in violation of antitrust law to prop up woke practices. There may also be occasions where governments can pull various forms of financial or tax assistance or institute litigation under various civil rights laws. Long term, however, the most important and lasting antidote for industrializing intolerance is in this room. Because of your education and experiences, you and your peers will be future CEOs, bankers, technologists, lawyers, scientists, and scholars at the greatest private sector institutions around the world. If you challenge woke collectivism's underlying rejection of rational thought, if you demand the same intellectual rigor that built this institution and our entire civilization, and if you dedicate yourself to the careful examination of the logic of natural daily life, then woke collectivism will not have the oxygen or adherence that it needs to survive. You have the power to protect individual freedom and dignity, which are essential to human flourishing and are the hallmarks of a just society. For the sake of our society, and for the sake of our own happiness, I hope you seize this opportunity to build a culture that truly pursues the common good. Thank you again for inviting me to speak and for all this union does to practice the principles that we need today.